Hi, I'm Kathryn Jean Lopez from the National Review Institute, and I am so delighted to to be able to welcome friends of mine, Teresa Tomeo from the Ave Maria uh, radio, author of so many books, of a former journalist in secular media, Sister Josephine Garrett, sister of the Holy Family of the Nazareth, and we know each other from the Given Institute and so many other things, and Pia de Solenni, who is a theologian and the senior director of the IWP Capital. But again, we've all known each other for a long time, and it's so wonderful to be able to talk about this movie that's coming out on Friday about Mother Cabrini, Mother Frances Xavier Cabrini, who we're all fans of, we're all rely on in many ways. And and I have to say, as a New Yorker, I really appreciate the fact that we have saints who lived among us in the United States. She's buried near the George Washington Bridge in Manhattan. And that's kind of an incredible thing that a lot of people don't appreciate. And so with that, I would like to maybe invite Teresa. First of all, we were talking this morning on your radio show just about how beautiful this movie is, and part of it, I mean, you're Italian, she was an Italian missionary. That your heart is close to her as well. Can you talk a little bit about what your reaction to the movie was?
Well, there's so many things to say about this film. I mean, just from my background, my husband and I are both, we like to call ourselves FBIs, full-blooded Italians. So we have Italian blood running through our veins all the way back to several generations, and we've actually traced our family trees. And my grandparents on my mother's side, their names are actually inscribed in the Wall of Immigrants on Ellis Isle. My father's parents came through Reggio Calabria. They went through Messina to get to Ellis Isle, but they all came through Ellis Isle. And so immediately when I was watching this film, it was very La Familia for me, the family, because I grew up hearing the stories of how they immigrated very, very difficultly from their locations in Italy, in southern Italy, over to Ellis Island through New York. I thought that was really well done in terms of a desire for people to find a new life in America. But then I think from a Catholic perspective and a female perspective, this is so Catholic, so beautifully done, so well acted, and such an example of the feminine genius. And I'm so glad it's coming out on International Women's Day, because with women now, I mean, I was even wondering, and you and I, Kathryn, were talking about it on my show, Catholic Connection, like, well, why do we have an International Women's Day when it doesn't matter if you're a woman or a man, or you can be anything. But I think what's so clear in the Cabrini film is that she embodied the feminine genius, especially toward the end of the film when she says to the mayor of New York, he says, "Oh, you would have made a great man." She goes, "No, men cannot do what we do." And that wasn't a slap on men. That was actually an affirmation, a shot in the arm for women for spiritual motherhood and the feminine genius and male female complementarity. I could go on and on. There's a lot else I'll add, but I want to let the other ladies speak. But I loved it. I thought it was excellent. I've seen it twice so far. Once on the private screen on my computer, and then I went to the premiere 2 weeks ago in Philadelphia. Saw it on the big screen. So much better on the big screen. Beautiful film.
I have not seen it on the big screen. I envy you. Sister Josephine, what was your reaction to the movie?
I was captivated. The cinematography is beautiful, and I was grateful that there was so much artistic talent invested in telling her story and the story of her community. Sometimes, in Christian film, Christian Catholic film, and art, we are cutting corners, and then in that sense are not good stewards of the treasure of these stories. And so I feel like there was a good stewardship of her story, um, and also for her congregation, her sisters who are still living, like who are present today. I hope that they feel like their legacy was well stewarded. So the film was lovely. And when I came away from it, being a religious sister, I wish that I had seen their common prayer life in the film. Um, I didn't necessarily want to see her private prayer life because that bothers me when they, stick a saint in a chapel and have them talking to themselves like that's what our prayer life looks like. It's just not. It's this mystical hidden reality, and you can't capture that on film. without making it trite. But I do wish that there had been that common prayer life. But then I realized that this film um, really served not as a comprehensive telling of her story, but a natural introduction to this woman. And so it leaves the person watching it attracted to her. And when
Right.
we're attracted, we desire to know more. So I love that there's a biography available from the studio that filmed made the film, and that there's a book of her letters available to invite people to continue to befriend her and get to know her in an authentic way, not to try to make it all happen in 2 hours, which is inauthentic. So
Right, right. And I've heard that criticism from people. They wish that she was talking about Jesus more, but she did everything she did because of Jesus, right? And so I'm praying that's the entryway, right? And I also think, and Pia, I'll get to you in a moment. I think this movie is really important in our post Roe v. Wade, post Dobbs reality,
Mm.
because there's so much misinformation and confusion about what Christianity, what the Catholic Church believes about women, and to see a leader, a woman who leads and loves. And even in the opening scene, there's this little boy who is trying to save the life of his mother. We don't think about widows and orphans enough, and right there from the beginning there you have it. And so I just, again, on so many levels, I think this movie is important. And again, as sister said, not maybe not perfect, but an opening, not or comprehensive, or but an opening, a door. Pia, what was your reaction when you saw the movie?
Thank you, Kathryn. I thought that the technical side was just stupendous. I mean, I think we've really, just following up on Sister Josephine's point, we have made so much progress in this area. I can't say but the industry of faith-based films has really progressed. So I want to compliment them on that. I think it's a compelling story. As a Catholic, I wanted to know a little bit more of the interior, right? I don't need to see her personal prayer, but I needed to know a little bit of what's driving her, what's motivating her. I know it's up here, and I know it's Jesus who's motivating her. But as a story, that component didn't come out as clearly to me as I would have liked. What I did like was just this example of unique feminine strength. And that is the tradition of the church, right? This unique feminine strength throughout the ages. And it's present in the Old Testament. It starts with Our Lady's yes. And in the first chapter of Luke, yes to the incarnation, yes to become the mother of Jesus. And this is an area that I think we need to explore a lot more. And I think Mother Cabrini's example is just, I don't know how she did what she did, right? And that's, I don't know how anyone would do what she did now with all of our advancements. And and at the same time, part of the story that was missing, not missing, but you can only put so much into a movie. But part of the story is that she was born premature. She was a couple months premature. And so, and then when she wanted to enter religious life, she was rejected by 2 or 3 different communities because they said that she was too weak.
Right.
And this is the woman that ends up going back and forth across the Atlantic, crisscrossing the globe, going across the United States at a time when, I mean, most sane, rational people did not want to go across the United States. And she's out there. So I really would love if this prompts a conversation about feminine strength. Or maybe a better way of putting it is, what does strength look like in women?
Well, as Sister Josephine mentions in her writings, we have all these letters that she wrote back to her sisters in Italy, and those ship rides were so treacherous. The sisters were sick. Teresa and I were talking about this morning. There's one letter where she gets so annoyed at the priests because they're not celebrating mass, and her love of the Eucharist comes so clear in those letters, but just also just how terrible these rides were. Teresa, you said you're a former feminist, you've been on a journey.
Yeah.
I think some of the wisdom of this movie is that they're trying to reach people who aren't necessarily religious sisters or going to daily mass and all these things. Is that part of why you are attracted to this movie?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was pretty radical at an early age. I think in high school and college, and then even a few years after when I started working in the secular media, because quite frankly, that's what everybody was. That's what was drilled into our head when we were in college and J school was you put aside your career, and if you get married, they didn't tell that to men, but they told that to women. So it was all about the career and all things, me, myself, and I. But I think from a couple of perspectives in terms of what this says to women, I think it's very positive. I'm looking at this now also from a media perspective, because I don't know much, but I know the media and I know how people receive things and I know how important messaging is. And from a news perspective, and Kathryn, you know this in the news media, that how often, unless it's a good publication like yours or the work that we do, the Catholic Church is not presented in not only a balanced way, but it's often very inaccurate about the teachings and about what the church teaches about women, what the church teaches about life, what the church teaches about marriage, and especially in terms of women's roles, not understanding that the priesthood is not about female equality. Equality doesn't have to be sameness. We're equal but different. So this is, I think, a new feminist movie, as John Paul II would say. And that's what I loved about it, because it showed how this woman could go and sit and have conversations with the Pope, for crying out loud, and these cardinals. And she goes back more than once and she earns their respect, and she earns the respect of the Archbishop, who does a complete turnaround, right? He kicks her out and then he's waiting for her when she comes back. So I think on so many levels, it is about femininity. And I'm so glad they're showing it this month, and also on International Women's Day. It's opening to over 3,000 theaters, because this gives a different view, as Sister said, of what it means to dedicate your life to the work of Christ. I mean, this whole thing, my husband and I wrote a book on the corporal and spiritual works of mercy in marriage. Well, this whole movie is about the corporal and spiritual works of mercy. I mean, when did you clothe me? When did you see me naked? When did you feed me? Whatever you do for the least of my brothers, that you do unto me. That to me is the prayer. And that I think is going to be attractive to people to maybe think twice about religious life. Alejandro Monteverde told me this morning on Catholic Connection that they have already seen an interest in women seeking out information about possibly discerning the religious life. So there's all kinds of positive fallout from this film. And this it's a film. It's not perfect, but I thought it was extremely well done. I thought the acting was very good. And from a media perspective, I think it sends a lot of positive messages, and I think we need to support it.
Yeah, and I will not name other movies, but as a few of us have now mentioned, some Christian movies are terrible, and
Right.
God bless the people who try. But this there's an excellence about this, and as you say, Teresa, we should support it. Sister Josephine, did you have a particular reaction as a religious sister? And also, we know each other, as I mentioned, from the Given Institute, which the first time I was there, so many of us had the reaction, oh my goodness, if this had existed when we were 20 something, what a difference it would make in our lives. It's this forum for young Catholic women. And Cabrini is very close to that. I want all like Catholic high school students to see this movie, because I think it would just make so much difference in their lives.
Yeah. I as a religious woman, it was hard for me not to imagine my own mother foundress of my own congregation, because she came here from Italy, to Chicago in
Woo!
1885. Yeah, and so for serving immigrants, it was Polish immigrants in her case. And so I was just thinking about these women. Mother Cabrini, mother founderess. I also think Kathryn Drexel's in the same situation. I'm not sure. These women are uniquely positioned because they did not found their order under the direct patronage of a cleric, a priest, or
Right.
or other powerful men in the church. And so that presented to them unique struggles, unique features in their founding. These women definitely partnered with spiritual directors and were attentive to the work of the Holy Spirit and the folks that they entrusted to like provide spiritual direction to their foundings. But it was them who went to the Pope to said, "I'd like to start this order." And so, as a religious woman, it was just very anchoring for me. Just in the legacy of docility to the will of God. And as I was
Hmm.
listening, and not only docility, but like steadfastness, perseverance, but with respect and respect and reverence for the church. As y'all were talking about femininity, feminine strength, what was really in my mind was St. Paul, that the power of God is made perfect like in weakness. Where I am weak, then I am strong.
Yeah.
It was Pope St. John Paul II, and I believe in his letter to women. I could be wrong, I'm not a theologian, where he brought forth this idea that woman is, in a sense, archetype for how all humanity goes to God. And so, in the fact that we are a receptive sign before God, humanity can only be receptive. And so, there was a prophetic revelation in the spirituality of femininity that all humanity needs to attend to in order for us to return to God. And so I love that her power was threaded through frailty, and that there was this perfection of God's will, in this space that was frail, and in this space where there was struggle. That she wasn't this I am woman, hear me roar, and I'm never feel weak, and I never have emotions, and I never, that's not power. Like scripture tells us, the power of God, and where I am weak, then I am made strong, and that paradox. And so um I wish for more reflection on the revelation of what is feminine theology, the feminine genius y'all are saying, the importance of feminine strength is the way that y'all were describing it. I wish for more reflection on that, as well as like not only Mother Cabrini and but her contemporaries and what they were doing in and for the church and how uniquely positioned they were.
This is Pia's topic. I'm going to say though, I'm going to make
You're the theologian.
I'm going to make a
I'm not.
potentially silly comment though. So I wrote a piece years ago about being stalked by Kathryn Drexel because I take the Acela train on Amtrak between New York and Washington all the time. And you can see like Drexel University and Drexel this and Philadelphia. And she died the year that Bill Buckley founded National Review. And for whatever reason, I've always found that so powerful. Like, okay, like women in the church need to have a voice. And
Mm,
she went to the Pope. This is another example of somebody who went to the Pope and said, like, we need to do something about Indian and Black missions. And he said to her, well, what are you doing? Do it. do it. And that's the challenge, right? And that's part of the challenge of this Cabrini movie. You watch it, as you were saying, Pia, and so many of us have been saying, you watch it and you're like, what more can I do? And also talking about immigrants, we were talking, Teresa, this morning on your radio show. I mean, I'm passing undocumented immigrants all the time in New York City. And we hear
Right.
about this on the news and like, what are we doing? And it's not just
Well,
that.
and there's no perspective out there in the news on it. And this is such a weakness of the secular media and they don't even understand the Catholic teaching. If you read the catechism, what the catechism says is that, yes, we have to welcome the immigrant. We have to always be there for the vulnerable. We have to clothe them and feed them. But it goes on to say that the immigrants also have a responsibility when they come over to come here legally. And once they're here, to follow the laws, and that the country that is accepting those immigrants has the right to, maybe slow things down if they think it's necessary, or if they feel that their country is being threatened in some way, they have a right to do that. And what I think was very clear in this film is that she did meet their needs, their physical needs, but also their spiritual needs. And then also educationally, she not only gave them fish, but she taught them how to fish, which is, I think, a really important thing that often gets lost in the public discourse. It didn't make a political statement. There was no party politics in it, but it was very clear that the people to whom she was with whom and to whom she was serving, that they came through Ellis Isle legally, because there were times if you went through Ellis Isle, and I know this because I heard stories from family, that many people got rejected and sent home. So there was a very clear sense that these are people who came through legally. And again, it didn't make a political statement, but I think there's a lot of things that we could discuss here, and a lot of items within this which is a huge issue right now in an election year, that is not getting enough attention or full attention from the secular press. It's usually only one-sided. And if they try to attempt it from a Catholic perspective, they never go to actually what the church says. They just basically pick a few people that fit their agenda and then move on.
Pia.
So back to the theology part.
Right. The feminine genius.
I want to just follow up on Sister Josephine's point. So Cardinal Ratzinger, I think it was in 2003 or 2004, while he was still head of the Doctrine of Faith, wrote a document called On the Collaboration of Men and Women in Society. And in there are two key points that I love. One, that women have a role in every aspect of society, right? Two, and this is fantastic, he says that the vocation of every woman is to model how to be the bride, how to be the church. And so that's going to play out differently. Again, what I loved about St. John Paul II's vision of feminism, if you'll call it that, or the feminine genius, is that there's a heck of a lot of freedom in there. And so, people talk about gender fluidity. Well, I'm sorry, you look at the tradition of the church, our women saints, our men saints, there's a heck of a lot of fluidity in there in terms of how being a man or a woman is lived and what different strengths are brought out. We would say that they both display strength. They both display nurturing and loving and caring. I mean, but it's at the end of the day, what makes it different is being a man or a woman. And that's a metaphysical question. And I understand that it's very nebulous, but it also gives us so much freedom, because what's happening in the secular culture is, well, there's basically a checklist. You check these things, and then you're male or female, or you're non-binary, or you're this, that, one of 57 or 72 genders, whatever it is. There's no room. I mean, there was an op-ed in the New York Times within the past year or two about a woman saying, I don't really consider myself a conservative, but my daughter is what would be described as a tomboy back when, and now with the definitions that exist, she would be called, people would say that she needs to transition. So backing this up to the Catholic perspective, there's just so much freedom in terms of how we live our lives as a sexually differentiated man or woman. But underscoring that for women is that we have this vocation to model what it is to be the church, to be the bride of Christ, how to respond. And it's an active receptivity. I mean, Our Lady, when she says yes, it's not just something happens to her. She's given a question. And so she has to say yes to being receptive. And then she's able to receive something that's bigger than herself. She's able to receive Christ, God. She's able to receive God in the Christ incarnate, right? And so we have a mere human being able to receive God. That's only possible with active receptivity. You have to be willing to receive that. And so, and this idea of woman modeling the church and the response of the bride, I think we have a lot of work in that area. But what we see, again, bringing it back to the film, just here's Mother Cabrini. She's modeling the church to the world, and she's bringing Christ to the world. And in her, you see her, and okay, maybe I wanted a more profound conversation about her vocation or her interior life, but you can't miss the fact that she's motivated by something bigger than herself. And it's a type of selfless gift on her part, because I mean, on the material side of it, she's got the short end of the stick. I mean, she's running herself ragged, obviously not getting paid a big CEO salary. But look at what she does. And I just want to kind of draw this to a point. One of the interesting things in the whole conversation on the role of women, and again, it's been so secularized that a very important group of women have been left out. So the most powerful women at the turn of the century in the United States were probably women religious, because they were running institutions, they were running schools, hospitals, running, responsible for incredible amounts of money. They had incredible influence. And that group is rarely ever talked about. And so the conversation just kind of leapfrogged over them, leapfrogged over a lot of the fundamental equality issues, and got hijacked with pelvic politics. I mean, basically, and there's so many people that were part of the feminist movement more in the first wave, or even the first iteration of the second wave, that once they realized it had been hijacked, backed off. And it's just such an important thing to keep in mind. But we've had this example, Catholic women modeling strength. That's part of our tradition, and I don't think we talk about it enough. I think we need to do a lot more.
Right.
Well, that's part of
And
the
also,
reason, as you mentioned, that's part of the reason why the Cabrini movie, I think, is so important, because you see the witness, right? As you're all aware, at the end of the Second Vatican Council, and I was really humbled to have Pope Benedict give me this message again. He handed it to me in 2012. He says, women, the church says, women of the entire universe, whether Christian or non-believing, you to whom life is entrusted at this grave moment in history, it is for you to save the peace of the world. That is actually what the Catholic Church believes about women, which is not what's conveyed. And it's certainly, again, not to make it all about abortion, but, so much of what you were just talking about, Pia, the confusion, so much of it has to go back to the reaction to Humanae Vitae and the sexual revolution, and the fact that we no longer fully appreciate the complementarity, as you were talking about, Teresa. Sister Josephine, if there's one message that you would pray that people would take from this movie, what might it be?
I think, gosh, my head is so full from what we were just saying. So I'm
So
going to
much.
answer that.
There's so much to
The
talk
one
about.
message, the one message I would want them to take away, but I think it's really important that it be clear the freedom that Pia is talking about, and the broadness and expansion that comes from receiving God and being open to receiving the power of God. Like, it's not restricting, it's unleashing. And so when
Amen.
I'm with young women, I try to tell them, if you're a young woman, if you are having an experience, like in your personality or your preferences or whatever have you, that seems exceptional, it doesn't mean that you need to depart from that which is feminine. It means that I value you so much because you are a deeper revelation of the divine image of femininity. And so just that freedom to discover and receive the profound truth of what it is, what feminine is, like in the heart of God, like what that is, that's a mystery. And so it's continually being revealed to us. And so I just really don't want the importance of that, because that was what was unleashed in Mother Cabrini. It was unleashed in her. And so this woman who ought to have been dead, she should have been dead. According to all logic and science and reason, she should have been dead. And yet she was prolific, she was fruitful, abundantly fruitful. And so I just don't want that to be lost on the unleashing that can happen in someone when we receive the power of God, and it's not restricting, it's free, you're right, it's freedom. And so I guess what I would want folks to take away from the film is two things: to have a relationship with this saint, because the saints only lead us to God. It was Pope Francis who said that the saints are not perfect, perfect examples, but instead they are unique people who struggled and failed, but they allowed God's light to shine through them and in their particular unique shade. And so the saints are not going to fail us in bringing us to God. And so I want folks who watch this film to be attracted to her as a saint and to desire a relationship with her and to see the saints as people that we can have a relationship with. And I also want people to be challenged to ask themselves, what did God make me for? And what does God want to do with God's power in me? Like, what does God want me to do in the world with his power in me? And so to really ask those vocational questions, and to desire a sincere, authentic relationship with the saints. An authentic relationship with a saint can't take place in 2 hours. We got to get to know them. We have to invest in that friendship. We have to invest in it. So.
Well, and I think it's important to mention, because not everyone who's watching is Catholic or Christian. And sometimes people ask me, what does intercession mean? We believe that, like, the saints will call upon God to help us in prayer, just like knocking on Jesus's door and be like, Pia needs help, or Kathryn needs help, or Teresa needs help, or Sister Josephine needs help. And so we really do believe that there's an actual eternal relationship. And so that's part of what we're talking about. But then there's also, if you don't believe that, that's fine. But there's the witness, and that's a part of, again, what I think the genius of this movie is. You don't have to believe what I just said for you to be inspired by her. And the other thing I would encourage people is, I remember during COVID, so there's you all know the Fellowship of Catholic University Students, and during COVID they had this virtual session. And anyway, I sat in at NYU in a small group with boys, because I kind of know what the girls are thinking, but I didn't know what the boys were thinking. And I'm a journalist, so I can do that. And one of the guys said, and a theater student at NYU, so you can imagine what that environment might be like, okay, in Greenwich Village, right? And he talked about how an atheist friend of his, girl, one night while they were studying whatever they were studying, said to him, so you're Catholic and you're pro-life, but you don't seem to hate women. And thanks be to God, like, they had this trust that she could ask that question, right? And so then he started talking to her about how much Catholics revere the Blessed Mother, the Mother of God, and talked about John Paul II and feminine genius. And at the end of the conversation, she obviously wasn't converted, but she said, I never heard any of that. And I am hoping with this movie that's some of the reaction that people have. Like, I never knew who Mother Cabrini is. I never knew that nuns could be that beautiful and powerful and leaders and women, period, who are faithful. Teresa, you always look at things from a media perspective and a communications kind of perspective. How are you hoping that we've talked offline, and we talked this morning about some of the criticisms of the movie, and how are you hoping that obviously you can criticize stuff, and but how are you hoping that Catholics and Christians and people of goodwill receive this movie?
Well, I just hope that they, and I think that we spend way too much time in the Christian world attacking each other as opposed to lifting each other up. And I'm getting really tired of it, quite frankly. I mean, as Pia said, this movie was really well done. Technically, it was, and the acting was excellent. And okay, so maybe we would like to see, as we often mentioned, a little bit more here, a little bit more there. But what's the message at the end of the day? In addition to what Sister said so beautifully, totally agree with that, because I took away the message of, when you say yes to God, when you open your heart to God, with God, all things are possible. There's no way that she should have been able to accomplish everything that she accomplished, but she had such unwavering, strong faith despite all the constant obstacles. So I think it'll be a real shot in the arm for people in general, whether they are coming from a faith perspective, because we see the studies from the CDC about drug addiction and alcohol, especially among young people, and especially since COVID, and how there's this huge sense of hopelessness among young people. My hope is that they will be hopeful after seeing this film. And picking up on what Sister said, again, that when you say yes to God, it is not limiting. You have no idea what God can do. And that is the story of my life. That's why I was an emotional basket case when I left that film. I mean, it was so moving to me because I never expected to do Catholic media. I never expected that my husband would be a deacon. And it's not anything great that we did. We just kind of, stumbled back to each other and God, and little by little realized that God had a different plan for our lives and a different mission. And so when you accept that mission from God and you say yes, God will take that yes, and he will bring you along. I mean, you're going to come into rough spots. You're going to have suffering because we live in a fallen world. But when you say yes to God, he will use that yes. And the thing that I learned too, I did not know this. I don't know if you ladies knew this, but I did not know that Mother Cabrini was the big inspiration behind Mother Teresa of Calcutta. I did not know that. So when you think about that, what if Mother Cabrini had basically said, okay, I'm going to stay where I belong. I'm just going to stay in Lombardy, which she was doing great work there. And the bishops, really liked what she was doing and supported her there. But what if she decided just to stay in Italy? She probably would have had a great deal of success in Northern Italy and maybe in the whole country. But think about what she was able to accomplish because she believed in what God had put on her heart. And then she inspired so many others, including St. Teresa of Calcutta. Are you kidding me? I mean, come on. This is what can happen with a yes to God. And I've seen it in my own life. Again, not to brag on me, but this is all things Christ. And as she says in the movie from Philippians, I can do all things in Christ who strengthens me, which that scripture verse, by the way, is repeated numerous times in the film. So I just think message of hope and a message of saying yes to God and what God can do with your yes.
Well, the other thing, during COVID, I spent a lot of time outside an abortion clinic, sidewalk counseling and praying and things. And one of the things that was so striking to me is how much these girls didn't appreciate that they had dignity, that, they didn't have to have sex all the time with guys who wanted to have sex with them, like they could actually
Mhm.
lead, and be who they wanted to be, but they had no idea. There's some Rihanna song that I heard at the time, a Rude Boy, and it's all about like, I have to use him before he uses me. And
Mm.
if these girls who are listening to these songs, and of course that's like the quaintest thing they're hearing, right? There's porn and everything else. But if they could see this example, I mean, it could be a game changer. And that's kind of part of my prayer for this movie, that some of these girls who would never know ever, that there was such a person as
Right.
Mother Caprini could see this. I need to be respectful of everyone's time. And so, Sister Josephine and Pia, can I give you the last words here? Sister Josephine.
I'll let Pia give the last word. Yeah, I think the only other thing on my mind is just Mother Cabrini's sisters, the missionary sisters of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. To just remember that there are women still carrying her legacy in religious life. They'll often tell us that charism is like DNA, and so we have the charism within us. So I just want to, I don't know, thank her sisters and the congregation for continuing to carry the spirit of, as like Teresa said, like she believed in what God had put on her heart, and her congregation has a spirituality of the heart. and just a love for the Sacred Heart of Jesus. And so that's the only other thing I wanted to say, that like her legacy is still enfleshed in her daughters, the missionary sisters of the Sacred Heart of Jesus.
Well, and I do, one of the things I'm so moved by, if you go to the shrine in Washington Heights in New York, you see the Sacred Heart of Jesus statue is like one of the first things you see. And, you know, as Teresa and so many of us have been talking about, um, often people think Christianity is a no, right? And no, it's this tenderness that we're being called to, and she's such an example of that. Pia, last word.
I'm just very grateful to the filmmakers for this is, you know, as we say in Italian, capolavoro. It's a great work. And I really hope that we continue to have conversations about what it means for women to be strong. What does that mean, and what does that look like? And we have this tremendous tradition. And you know, my work on gender and feminist theory, I've always said with regard to the church, before we move forward, we have to understand the tradition that we come from. And oftentimes, what we think is our tradition is a caricature of the 1950s East Coast Catholicism, but I can't underscore caricature enough. And so we really need to understand our tradition better so that we understand how we move forward. And I think that I'm grateful to the Cabrini movie for being part of that and helping to facilitate that conversation. And then as well, keep our own vocational stories and what we can do. But I found her very inspiring. Thank you.
And I want to say thank you to Pia and Sister Josephine and Teresa. And Teresa also, I just want to underscore, has been on such a journey, and her part of her witness, I think, is part of the witness of the Cabrini movie. That, you know, this is, you don't necessarily have to be, you know, a religious sister to appreciate the beauty of what the Catholic Church offers, about what Christianity offers. And again, and Pia, you write about this, and Sister Josephine, you live this, you know, it's an alternative, you know, to so much of the misery. And again, not only the depression and the loneliness, but the enslavery people feel, you know. This movie is about freedom, and I hope it's a door opening to people understanding that that there's a whole culture that is not fully appreciated, and also the beauty of service, because as we've talked about, that's so much of her story. And so thank you again, Pia de Solenni, Sister Josephine Garrett, Teresa Tomeo. Thank you on behalf of the National Review Institute. And I also thank Carmel Communications, who helped organize this as well, and for the makers of the Cabrini movie, which I hope that people go out and see and invite other people to. Like that story I told about the NYU student. You don't have to be a Catholic or Christian to see a movie about a strong woman and just have a deeper appreciation for what Christianity and faith offers people. So thank you.